Good morning, church. As you can tell, we are in a study on the Ten Commandments. It will take us up through our 10th anniversary as a church. That works out in the calendar. It wasn't really the intent, but I think it's kind of cool. A couple other things for you to consider date-wise is we are going to be back in the Gospel of John after we finish the Ten Commandments. And that'll take us through the summer. You guys know we have started in the beginning and we do a few chapters and then we go to something else, then we come back to it. So we're going to keep doing that. And we are going to pick up with a couple more chapters of John this summer. I'm actually going on a 6-week sabbatical starting on May 22nd. So I'm looking forward to that. We have a great lineup of preachers for you in my absence. But last week we talked briefly about the third commandment. Right? We talked about the commandment to not take the Lord's name in vain. I encouraged you to talk about it with your life groups, and so I hope you had fruitful discussions there. But if you're just joining us, I want to tell you why we're studying the Ten Commandments, because it might seem a little strange. Like, why are we studying a list of rules is what you might see them as. And for one, let's just be honest, it's what comes next in Exodus. So we're studying it because of that. But we don't have to study it because it comes next in Exodus, but we want to study it for the second reason, which is because we really believe that these commandments tell us how to best live as people saved by the grace of God. I love reading the Psalms. If I have a choice and if I can only pick one place to read, I usually would prefer the Psalms. Psalm 16, verse 11 says this, and made me think of this series. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hands are pleasures forevermore. I believe in the Ten Commandments, what God does is he makes known to us the path of life, and so we would do well to live according to that. But we started this series the week before Palm Sunday, and so it's been a while, so I want to remind you of what the Ten Commandments are not. The Ten Commandments are not a list of the 10 things that you must do perfectly in order to be accepted by God. The Ten Commandments, as we see in the instance when they're given to the Israelites as they come out of slavery in Egypt, they were not something that God said, hey, you keep these, then I'll rescue you. That's not how it worked. The way it worked was God rescued them because he made a promise to rescue them, and then he says, here is how you best walk in your freedom. Here are these 10 things. These we call it the moral law. Same is true for us. We do not somehow muster up enough strength and self-control to keep the Ten Commandments and then expect that God will save us. God saves us, and then he says, here is how you best live as people who I have saved or I have freed. He saves us, the Bible says, while we were yet sinners. Today we're going to look at the fourth commandment, one that I believe actually requires the most thought out of all the commandments. It has required the most deep study. I've spent countless hours listening to all the perspectives, looking at church history, how it was viewed throughout the ages, and I have come to some conclusions, and I'll share them with you, but I want to tell you why it requires so much thought. One is because Jesus had to correct it. He had to tell the people living in his day, hey, you're not doing it right. So that's one reason, and they were a lot closer to it than we are. And the other is that in some ways Jesus is the fulfillment of what the fourth commandment points to, and so we have to take that into consideration as well. And so let's get started. We're going to be in several passages today because I believe we need to look at the whole counsel of God to understand what the fourth commandment means for us. But we're going to look at where it's given in Exodus chapter 20, and we'll pick up with verses 8 to 11, which is where we find the fourth commandment. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Fun fact, this is And when you just consider the sheer amount of words that are used, this is the longest commandment that we have in the Ten Commandments. But the other verses really explain the commandment. The commandment's in verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But then we get all these words telling us what that actually means and even why. And so we're going to dive deep into what this commandment means. But first, I want to give you the main point and then address one reason why some people argue why there's really, in essence, they don't say this, but why they really argue that there's 9 commandments and this commandment doesn't count anymore. And I'll explain why I think they're wrong. But anyways, main point. In the 4th commandment, God makes clear the rhythm he created man to live by. In the 4th commandment, God makes clear the rhythm he created man to live by. You know what rhythm is, right? We think of rhythm when we think of music, like there's R&B music, rhythm and blues, right? But there's this idea that like when you dance, you're supposed to be dancing in rhythm with the music. Despite what you may think, I do not know how to dance. I have no rhythm. I struggle to clap and sing in church at the same time. It's very challenging. It's stressful. I look at people, and then I'm trying to just do what they do, and then I look at somebody else, and I'm like, they're not doing what they're doing. Which one do I follow? Because I can't do it off the music, so I got to pick a person and just copy them, and this is hard. Took dance lessons with my wife. She said, it's not fun. I don't want to do this anymore. I thought she'd be farther by now. So she won't take dance lessons with me. So I have in my bucket list, I believe in the 10,000 hour rule when it comes to mastering something. And so I believe I can get it down, but to get to the place where it's actually enjoyable, I think I will need 10,000 hours of training. So maybe in retirement. I would like to dance well in rhythm before I die, but don't have time for that. But there's a rhythm that God created man to live by. There is. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. We're told it's rooted in what God modeled in creation. The God, the creator of the universe, who has no need to rest, worked for 6 days, Genesis 1 tells us, and then he rested from all of his work on the 7th day. I want you to think about this. Why do we have a 7-day week? You can point to why we have a month. You can point to why we have a year. The month is based on the moon, and the year is based on the sun. Just Google it. I didn't know that either, but it's true. There's nothing to base a week off of, except for God's revealed divine revelation. God is the one who invented the 7-day week. God is the one that says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to live in periods of 7 days at a time. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. That's not something that man figured out on their own. We would just be like, okay, here's a month, here's what you do every month. But no, we break our lives into 7-day periods because God created it. And I believe that God, as our creator, knows what's best for us because he created us, right? He knows how he designed us. He could have designed us to not need to rest, but he designed us to need to rest. And so if we refuse to cooperate with that design, we are going to suffer for it because it's not the way we were designed. And you could fight against this. You can say, well, I want to work 7 days a week for 30 years, for 40 years, and then I want to rest 7 days a week until I die. We call that the American dream. You work, and then you retire, and you do nothing. Neither of those are what's best for you. Even if you do not have a paid job, you are created to work. You don't have to get paid to work. Ask a stay-at-home mom. She works harder than all of us, and she gets paid nothing. Even gets looked down upon as some people as, well, why don't you have a job? No, that's the hardest job, right? That's work. But I want to deal with this thing that causes people to essentially say there's only 9 commandments for New Testament believers, and it's a question that we have to answer, and it's this: how does Jesus' work in redemption change our understanding of the 4th commandment? Because it does, but the question is how. It's not if, it's how. There's two texts we need to consider. The first one is Hebrews 4, 9, and 10, and it says this: "So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his work as God did from his." Okay, where is Hebrews in the Bible? Easy question. New Testament. Where is Exodus? Old Testament. Okay, so we have Old Testament command. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. New Testament, after Jesus rose from the dead, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. How do we make the connection? There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God is not talking about the 7-day rhythm where you work 6 days and rest 1 day. That's not what it's talking about. What it's talking about is salvation. It's talking about there remains a Sabbath rest. When you place your faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross, you enter into God's rest. You enter into this understanding that I do not have to work for my salvation. I can rest from that. I can choose to live according to God's ways because it's what's best for me and I want to honor God, but I'm not doing that as work to earn my salvation. We have this clearly stated in Scripture, Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. "For it is by grace that you've been saved through faith. It is a free gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast." So in essence, we can get to boil that down is, in order to be a Christian, you have to acknowledge, I rest from that type of work. I rest from trying to work to earn my salvation. If you think you're working to earn your salvation, you are by definition not a Christian. And so you enter into this rest. This Sabbath rest remains. This Old Testament commandment of the Sabbath points to this ultimate fulfillment of the rest that God has for us from our trying to earn our salvation. Okay, I don't think is something that you can really argue about. Colossians chapter 2 talks about letting no one pass judgment about you about Sabbaths and other things, and it says, because these are just a shadow of things to come. The thing to come is this rest from our work. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. This is what I believe Jesus meant when he said in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 and 29. It's a beautiful couple of verses. It says this: "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Do you know what this is not saying? It's not saying, come to me and I will give you a 7-day rhythm, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. You don't need to come to Jesus to that. You could just operate that way, right? You could just choose to do that. You don't need Jesus to do that. But you do need Jesus to have rest for your soul. You need to trust in his finished work on the cross. Our salvation is secure not because of the work we do, but because of the work Jesus did. Understand that, right? On the cross, Jesus says, "It is finished," before he breathes his last breath. There's nothing we can add to his work. It is finished. So here's our first point. In Jesus, we can find true Sabbath rest. We got to start there. The other stuff that we're going to talk about is important, but if you mess this up, it doesn't really matter. In Jesus, you can find true Sabbath rest. The ultimate fulfillment of this fourth commandment is that we all can experience rest for our souls because of Jesus' finished work on the cross. We are to remember this every time we gather on Sunday. We gather on Sundays to remember that we do not have to work for our salvation. But I want to make a connection for you because the question still remains, what does this have to do with the fourth commandment versus Jesus being the fulfillment and giving us true Sabbath rest? And so let's consider how the Jewish people and the Israelite people obeyed the fourth commandment. Some of you might know this, but they worked 6 days, and their week began, just as ours does, on Sunday. And so they worked Sunday to Thursday, or they would say they worked Sunday to Friday. It just depends on how you break it down. But their rest time was Friday evening to Saturday evening, sundown to sundown. They need clocks to figure this out. The sun goes down, sun goes down, that's your Sabbath. Don't do any work during that time. It was very serious. Exodus 35, verse 2 tells us that if they didn't keep it, they were to be put to death. I don't know if anybody was put to death for breaking the Sabbath. It's probably something I could find out, but that was the penalty for breaking the Sabbath in Israel. But there's not many Christians today who do this Jewish Sabbath practice of resting from Friday evening to Saturday evening, and so we have to ask why. We need to, we gotta, if it was important then to keep it that way, why isn't it important now to do it in that way? Should we all just be put to death? All right? What we find in church history is that the earliest Christians, right? You can't be a Christian before Jesus comes. So the earliest Christians, so Jesus rises from the dead, they gather on Sunday mornings. Why? It's because that's the day Jesus rose from the grave. The Bible calls it the Lord's Day. This is not a idea that people disagree on. It says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, that John, when he receives the vision that Revelation is based on, he was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. That implies that we know what the Lord's Day is. Sunday. It's the day that the Lord rose from the grave. But we have to think about this. Was this the Sabbath, or was this something different? Is Sunday the Christian Sabbath? You can Google that question. You'll find lots of opinions on it, but I'm not convinced that Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, but I think it's an important question. It has practical implications. Some of you are a little bit older than me, and so you grew up with something that I've been told about called blue laws. Blue laws are this idea that, hey, I want to go to Target on Sunday, and it's closed because there's blue laws. You can't go to Target on Sundays. People are nodding their heads, right? I don't know what that's like. Only thing I know is like Chick-fil-A. We'll talk about that in a minute because I think there's a good application there. But did you know, when I looked this up, we still have 2 blue laws in effect in Maryland? Did you know that? I was shocked. Professional sports teams are not allowed to have a game that starts before 1 p.m. on Sundays in Maryland. I mean, we know that that's the case, but we didn't know that that was a rule, right? So that's the thing. And then the other blue law is one that I'm pretty sure most of you don't know about because it has no effect on us because we live in central Maryland. But in Maryland, only certain counties allow the sale of cars on Sundays. And it's all the counties around here. So if you drive an hour north, south, east, or west, they don't allow sales of cars on Sundays, still to this day. And it's under the category of blue laws. But I really do believe the most impactful cultural place where we see what you might call a blue law, which isn't really a law, it's a self-imposed decision, is Chick-fil-A. You're leaving here on Sunday, you're like, I want some food and I want it fast, and you're like, I'm going to go to Chick-fil-A. You get in the drive-thru and you sit there and sit there and sit there, and you're like, why aren't they talking to me? And you look in there and they're like, nobody's there, right? And you're like, I guess I got to go to McDonald's or Wendy's, eat some inferior food, but Sunday is treated as special by Chick-fil-A. And I believe that God has blessed them because they're making just as much money as the other companies are making, if not more. They're definitely making more money than McDonald's, right? With 6 days, a whole whatever percent that is, 1/7 less time to make money, they're making more money. God is blessing them for this. And I want to tell you that I don't believe that Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday because they believe Sunday is the Christian Sabbath. I got to tell you that because you guys don't know this. I'll let you in on my secret. I write most of my sermons at Chick-fil-A. I'll sit there for like 8 hours straight and write a sermon. And people, they'll come ask me about it, and I'll tell them about my sermon and all that. It's just my preferred place to write. And I know a lot about Chick-fil-A because of this, because people behind me are having meetings and all this stuff. I thought that you just work whatever day, and then you get off on Sunday when you work at Chick-fil-A. That's not the case. Full-time people at Chick-fil-A have another day off. Like they're closed on Sunday, but they also have a day off. They're like, my day off. They don't mean Sunday. They mean a different day. It might be Tuesday. It might be Thursday. But they get a day off and Sunday off, just like the rest of us, right? Most of us work 5 days a week, and we have like a Saturday and a Sunday off. And so what that leads me to conclude is that Chick-fil-A understands that there is a necessary need to rest from your work, but they close on Sunday. Why? Because it allows people to worship. It takes away this, I got to work thing. I got to work, so I can't go worship. No, you don't say that if you work at Chick-fil-A. You don't have to be a Christian to work at Chick-fil-A. We know that. But if you want to be a Christian or you are a Christian, they're not going to stop you from gathering to worship with your church body. And so I just want to just point them out because I think they're doing something really cool and it's working. But if you can't tell, I am not convinced that Sunday has to be the Christian Sabbath. I believe Sunday can be your Christian Sabbath, but I don't believe it has to be. I actually believe that many in the early church, the Jewish converts to Christianity, would have kept the Jewish Sabbath and gathered on Sunday morning. So we would say this, if my conclusion is correct, what we would say is the way that the early Christians saw Jesus fulfilling this commandment didn't lead them to abandon the rhythm that God gave for them, but it added this day of celebration, Easter, every single week. They celebrated the resurrection of Jesus Christ every single week on Sunday, which is what we're supposed to do as well. They're celebrating the fact that Jesus has given them rest from their work, rest for their souls. So I don't believe the fourth commandment is the reason that we gather on Sundays. I don't. I believe there's a tie-in to it. It's ultimate fulfillment. I believe there is a command that we gather. I don't think it has to be on Sunday morning. I think you could choose to be a part of a church that gathers on Saturday evenings for whatever reason. But Hebrews 10:25 is why we have a command to gather with the people of God on a regular basis. It says to not neglect meeting together as is the habit of some. You don't need the fourth commandment for that. If you think about practically how this plays out, it's pretty important that we set aside this time, right? If we don't set aside time to worship, it's probably not going to happen. Our lives are busy. If you're like, well, this week I'll see what day works for me, this week I'll see what days work for me, here's how it works. Ask me if I'm free on Sunday at 10 a.m.
Are you free on Sunday at 10 a.m.?
No. Am I free next Sunday? Ask me if I'm free next Sunday at 10 a.m.
Are you free next Sunday at 10 a.m.?
No, I'm not. Right? You're like, well, I want to golf this weekend, and it's going to be raining on Saturday, and it's going to be sunny on Sunday morning, and I want to tee off in the morning so I can be done by lunch. Is that really more important? Is that the priority? We have to ask these questions. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm here to ask you questions that you might not ever hear another American ask you. So how do we keep the fourth commandment today? We got to make sure we're clear on point number one. Jesus is how we find true Sabbath rest. But that doesn't mean we can abandon or ignore the rhythm that God created us to live by, right? We're on the same page. That's the foundation that we are working off. So what we are going to look at now is 2 points about how we keep the fourth commandment. And the first one I think is maybe more important than the second one. The first point, which is our second point, is this. You can really mess up the fourth commandment. All right? You could really mess it up. You can mess it up by ignoring it, and you can mess it up by being legalistic about it. This is what Jesus shows us in the Gospels. There's multiple places where Jesus has to correct their understanding of the Sabbath. He has to say, hey, you guys aren't doing this right. And one of them is one story found in the 3 synoptic Gospels. It goes like this. On the Sabbath, Jesus and his disciples, they were picking grain. And this is what Mark's account says. Mark 2:24-28 says, and the Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? says, and he said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but for the priest to eat, and also gave it to them who were with him. It says, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Here's the claim I believe Jesus is making. The Sabbath was never meant to prevent thriving. And it was never meant to be the worst day of the week. This is what happened in Jesus' day. They had all these rules, but I want you to think about it. The Sabbath is made for man. He doesn't say made for Jewish men and women. He says made for man, mankind, humanity. All of God's creation is who the Sabbath is made for. If God designed us to need this rhythm, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not to determine whether that's good for you. God designed us to operate this way, and so it's made for all of man, whether you believe in him or not. There are non-religious books like Peak Performance, which look at companies that choose to impose a day off. They say you may not work 7 days a week, and they've seen productivity rise. They talk about how after you do 7 days in a row and you don't take a day off, your productivity plummets. Why is that? It's not a coincidence. There's even done studies with sports teams and seen that, like taking a day off of practice. Like these things are important, and it works whether you believe in God or not. But all these rules that the Pharisees put in place, Jesus says these weren't why the Sabbath was made. I believe what Jesus rejects is the way that the Jewish leaders imposed all of these rules on all the people. I don't believe that it was necessarily wrong for an individual follower of God to say, I'm not going to do this on the Sabbath, but then to say, everybody can't do this on the Sabbath is the problem. The Jewish Talmud created 39 categories of work. The command is don't do any work on the Sabbath. I understand why they felt the need to do this. It eased them because they're probably scared because Exodus 35 tells us that you will be put to death if you break this, if you do any work on the Sabbath. You're like, oh, what does that mean? And so they made up rules. Like you can only walk 1,000 feet from your house on the Sabbath. They're like, okay, you step 1,001, you're going to die. So it's like you walk 499 steps, so I guess you could do 500, and then you have 499 to get back to the house, and then does it reset? Can you go 1,000 the other way next? Can you do that? Like you got to make all these rules if you're gonna live like that. You've seen these rules. I know you have. You've been in buildings. I'll take Johns Hopkins in Baltimore as the one I can think of. They have an elevator. It's probably the same thing at Howard General. I just haven't seen it. They have an elevator that on the Sabbath stops on every floor. I've been in that elevator before. I'm like, what is wrong with this elevator? The elevator is doing a lot of work on the Sabbath. But here's the deal. Somebody decided that it's not work to ride in the elevator, but it's work to press the button. To press the button, that's work. But to step in the elevator and ride up the elevator and stop on every single floor is not work. I have no problem saying that that's nonsense. Jesus doesn't want us doing that. So what were the rules that God gave them for the Sabbath? You might think that there's going to be like a whole bunch. They had 39 categories. That's just categories, and then rules for each category. There's been said that if you wanted to know all of the rules for the Sabbath, you need the rest 6 days to study the rules so that you can keep them on the one day. Guess how many rules that we have in the Bible about the Sabbath? 2. Seriously, specifics. And one is not really a rule. One was a rule for the Israelites when God in Exodus 16 gives them the Sabbath. He says, hey, I want you to keep the Sabbath. I'm going to give you manna. I want you to gather a double portion the day before the Sabbath, and on the Sabbath, it'll last. And God even miraculously made it work because it didn't work any other day. If you kept too much, it would rot. And if you, he had all this stuff working so that they would learn this. That's one place. So we see something like the Sabbath needs to be prepared for. If you're going to take a day off, you got to prepare for that. Yes, you have to work harder on the other days to take a day off. We all understand that. But the only other rule is in Exodus chapter 35, verse 3. And guess what it says? You shall not kindle a fire on the Sabbath. That's it. But yet we have 39 categories of man-made rules of how we're supposed to keep the Sabbath. Don't you think, have you ever tried to read through the Bible and you get into the books of the law and you read them and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to have a rail around the roof of my house and all this stuff? Listen, if God wanted to give them all these rules for the Sabbath, he would have given it to them. He gives them all the other rules, but yet because this command has the consequence of death, right? I believe they're afraid. And because they're afraid, they make all these rules to make sure they stay far away from breaking the command. And in doing so, much of the rules that they are imposing on themselves aren't actually breaking the rules. They are rules to keep you from breaking the rules. You know what I'm saying? This is why Jesus says, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath should not be the worst day of the week. I actually believe when you do the Sabbath right, you'll look forward to it. Say, this is the day that I don't have the burden of thinking about work. That's what God wants for you. This is the day that I don't check my emails. This is the day I don't answer work calls. God wants you to have that break in your life. He knows you need it. Your mental health can't take it to be on call 7 days a week every week. He didn't design you for that. So let's get back to our main point. In the fourth commandment, God makes clear the rhythm he created man to live by. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. I do believe that we are to obey our conscience when it comes to this. And I say that not because I think it's a good idea. The Bible says we have to obey our conscience. To disobey your conscience is to sin. But I say it because of what we find in Romans chapter 14, verse 5, which says this. One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. What that means is that two Christians can do two different things in these types of categories, and they both can be pleasing to God. We're not talking about everything. We're going to talk about don't murder. One Christian can't murder and say, I'm convinced in my mind that God's okay with that. No, you can't do that. But with the Sabbath, you could. If you're fully convinced in your mind, we could have two different conclusions about what's okay on the Sabbath. You may say, hey, we don't think it's a good idea to watch any TV on the Sabbath. You can say that. You just can't impose that on everybody. You obey your conscience. Romans 14, I believe, is Paul's response to Jewish Christians who were telling Gentile Christians, hey, you need to basically adopt all these Jewish practices in order to be a follower of Jesus. And Paul's like, no, you don't. He says in Colossians chapter 2, don't let anyone pass judgment on you according to all these things. And the last thing he says is Sabbaths. He says, be fully convinced in your own mind. Most Christians, especially anxious American Christians, don't like this. We rather have someone tell us what to do and we can just follow it. But because we don't have that, we actually have to pray. We actually have to do our own thinking and ask God, what does he want us to do? How can I honor the Sabbath in my family in this season of my life? We have to do that hard work of talking to God and listening to God and trying to determine what's best for our family. What are our Sabbath practices going to be? How are we going to keep the Sabbath holy? I can't tell you what to do. All I can do is ask you questions to help you get to the place where you're fully convinced. And so that's what I'm going to do. I have 5 questions to share with you. But before I share that, I want to give you our last point. It's a principle. It's the principle I believe that the Sabbath, that is for us today, which is this. We need to set set aside time each week to worship and rest. That's as far as I can go. I can't tell you what day it has to be. I can't tell you how long it has to be. I'm going to tell you, you need to set aside time each week to worship and rest. In Exodus 20, the fourth commandment says 1 day in 7 is to be set apart. How is it set apart? You don't work. We have the ultimate fulfillment in Jesus, right? Being our true Sabbath rest and being the reason that we don't have to work for our salvation. And so we commemorate that by gathering with our church family. And so that's why we have this concept of resting from our work, by resting and resting to worship. So how does this work? Well, in America, most people, not everybody, most people have a 5-day work week. Monday to Friday, get off the weekend. Saturdays off, Sundays off. Most people, not everybody. We got doctors, we got police, we got all kinds of jobs that you could be in. You might work Monday to Friday and take a day off of your job and do housework on Saturday and worship God on Sunday and rest on Sunday. Recharge on Sunday. You might do that. You might say, what's better for our season of life, because our kids have sports on Saturday, is we are going to relax and go to sports and do that stuff on Saturday, and then on Sunday we are going to worship and do housework on Sunday. You might come to that conclusion. I can't tell you what to do. If you're like me, sometimes you work on Sundays. Some people think I only work on Sundays. It takes a lot of work to do this work on Sundays, and so I work other days. But on Sunday, I say Sunday is my most stressful day of the week, and it is. So Sunday can't be my day of rest. I could rest Sunday afternoon, but Sunday morning from like 5-something a.m. till whatever time we leave, that is stressful. And so it's not my day of rest. I have to pick a different day. You might have to pick a different day. You're free to do that. You are free in Christ. You do not have to choose Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, but you might. You might choose that. That might be the best practice for you in the season of life that you are in. My work is also mental and emotional. I said it the first service, not in my notes, but I think it makes sense. I could do my job at 450 pounds. It requires nothing physical to do my job. I may be tired, but when I get off work for the day, I want to do something physical. I want to do yard work or something because my body's do something. All you did all day was think and type and talk to people. You didn't do anything. And so it wants to do something physical, so I'll do that. For me to recharge, I got to do something physical. If you're a construction worker and you work 6 days a week, your day off might look very different than my day off. Your day off might look like my day on. You're sitting around watching TV, relaxing, because your body is tired. My body is not tired after a week of work. My mind is tired, my emotions are tired, but my body is let's do something. And so I'll do something. Right? You got to figure out what works for you. I share this because I believe that how each of us rests and recharge should and does look different. Are you ready for these 5 questions? First question. What time do I set aside each week to worship? You're like, well, I'm here now, Sunday. Here's the other question that you can take under this. Is it on your calendar? Remember I said, ask me if I'm free on Sunday at 10 a.m.? I don't even have to check my calendar for Sunday because it's been my habit for so long that it's it doesn't matter if I'm preaching or not. I'm not free on Sunday morning. Almost to the point where why would you even ask me that? Don't ask me that. It's not because I'm a pastor, it's because I'm a Christian. Right? This is my time that is set aside to worship God. I will not go have breakfast with you on Sunday. This is not going to happen. Might make an exception, but I can tell you that those exceptions are not going to be more than what I can fit on my one hand in an entire year. Second question. What time do I set aside each week to rest or recharge? Is it on your calendar? just like the time for worship, if you're going to have a set-aside time to rest and recharge. Here's what happens. Especially pastors are bad at this. Pastors, like I have pastors meetings sometimes, and they're like, well, I change my day off every week. That doesn't work. If you change your day off every week, you never have a calendar that says, I'm off, so that when people ask you, are you free, you're always free, and so your day off might happen once a month. You have to have a set day off to actually have a day off, and that's going to lead us to question 4. But question 3 is about the quality of these times. What makes these times different than other times? Like, could an outside person look at your life and say, hey, they do something different on this day because of this? Because they are trying to honor God? Or does it just look like all the other days? Because you know that Romans 14 text where it says some people consider all days the same? Not anymore. There's nobody. I have not met a single Christian that actually lives like that. Every day is like Sunday. Every day has things that you could point to that are like a part of my Christian walk that are like, this is my worship. And nobody does that. It's like it's a mute point. Like you could make the argument, every day is the same. Okay, show me. Show me what's different about all 7 days of your life that I could point to and see that it's different. And I don't think anybody can. And so I don't really think it's a good argument to be made. But what are you doing to intentionally set aside time to worship and rest or recharge? All right, the question 4 is this. In 2023, how consistent have I been with this? This is just a gut punch. If you say the idea of, well, I just pick a day, I just look at my calendar for the month and just pick some days, or I just see when it happens. It doesn't work. And so I just ask you this so that you can see that you really need to put it on your calendar. Final question, question 5, is there something I can do to improve this? The answer is yes. So don't just answer that. Everybody's answer is yes, but then, like, what? Not if so, because it is so, what? And you fill it in. Remember, the 4th commandment is not about 1 day a week. The 4th commandment is about 7 days a week. 6 days you work, 1 day you rest. What that means is you might have a mindset, well, I like to work 75% 7 days a week because it's better. And I say, no, it's not. Not because it's my opinion, but because God says work 6 days and rest 1 day. So work harder on 6 days and take off 1 day. Get up earlier, stay at work later, I don't know. You got freedom to figure this out. It's very countercultural, though. Nobody in America, except for maybe in the church, is going to challenge you on this. The 4th commandment is the most ignored commandment of all. Most people don't even feel convicted when they break it. They're like, well, I just work when I want to work and I rest when I want to rest. It's like, no. That's not making the day holy. That's not setting apart a day. That's just letting whatever happens, happens. Set aside the time. You might start with something simple. You might say, hey, we're going to keep a Jewish Sabbath according to the calendar. So that means on Friday, you could start this week. On Friday, we're not going to make dinner. And we're going to get carry out. We're going to rest from making dinner, right? You got to take baby steps because this is not a normal thing to do in our society. So you might try something like that. Tell your kids, hey, on Friday we don't make dinner because we're resting, and you thank God for providing the means so that you could order the food wherever you ordered it from, probably Chick-fil-A, right? Then that. You might also say, I'm going to turn my phone off. I'm going to turn, especially if you have a work phone, just turn it off. If you have a regular phone, you got to do some thinking, block some numbers. But emails, maybe you don't check your work email 1 day a week. Like, you get baby steps. You're not going to figure this out in a week. You're probably not going to figure this out in 3 months of trying it every week. But you're going to keep tweaking it and trying to get to the place where you're like, man, that really was refreshing for me to do that, right? Most of us have this Sunday morning thing down. Our church is better than a lot, where they say, like, attendance, because of the infrequency of people attending church, the attendance numbers have gone down, but the number of people are the same. I don't think that's really true at our church, but it is true of the American church. But yeah, setting aside this time to worship and setting aside time to rest whenever you decide that'll be. But I'm going to have you answer these 5 questions and bring them to your life groups this week. If you're not in a life group, it's a great week to check it out. You're attending a life group one time is not a commitment to attend the life group for the rest of your life. Hear me say that. You can attend the one life group once and say, these people are weird, I'm going to try a different one. It's fine. You can do that. You don't have to tell them that, though. Just keep it in your head. All right. But I'm going to give you some next steps. Our worship team is going to come up and get ready for our closing song. But if you get out your phone, you can scan the QR code, and that will take you to our Connect card. On there, you'll see a place for you to tell us what you're interested in. You can let us know if you are interested in life groups. We'll send you a link so that you can, we'll try to send that to you tomorrow if you check it today, so that way you can have time to attend one of our groups that meets. A lot of them meet on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, some on Monday. One meets today, but you're not going to get it in time for that. But I just encourage you to fill this out. If you're new with us and you give us your mailing address, we'd love to mail you a free gift. The next step A is this: place your trust in Jesus' finished work. If you're going to experience the true Sabbath rest that Jesus has for you, you must understand what Jesus says when he's on the cross and he says, "It is finished." What's finished? The work of redemption is finished. The thing that must have happened for me to be saved is finished. You must say, "I believe that." I believe when he says it is finished, that it is finished includes me. Something that I can't stress enough. Yes, I think it's good for you to adopt the rhythm that's set forth in the fourth commandment, but it's much more important if you're going to say, I can only think about one thing this week, think about this. Think about, do I trust in Jesus' finished work on the cross? We're going to actually have a baptism next week. It's planned, and so if you're making this decision or you made this decision recently and you haven't been baptized yet, which says to the world, I have decided to follow Jesus, I would encourage you to check the box for baptism, and I'll get you a baptism questionnaire. We can get you in the water next week, and so I would encourage you to let us know that by checking that box. Next step B, you've seen the questions, but I want you to answer the 5 questions given. We're going to post these on social media so that you can find them. Maybe for question 5, your answer is going to be, I'm just not going to answer emails one day a week. It could be that simple, right? But what are you going to do differently? Keep tweaking it. I'm saying adding to it, but what you're doing, I don't mean like adding rules. What I mean is figuring out what's going to lead to your flourishing, what's going to lead to your thriving according to this rhythm. What does it look like in the season of life that you're in to have a day of rest? God created us to need a weekly rhythm of worship and rest, and so when we choose to operate according to that design, we're saying, God, I trust you. I trust your design. I'm not going to try and figure out an alternative route to living and thriving, but I'm just going to trust that what you've revealed in your word is what's best. Next step C, read John Mark Comer's Ruthless, Elimination of Hurry. This is my copy. Great book. It talks about something called hurry sickness. Most Americans are affected with hurry sickness, and it talks about practices that you can adopt to remedy that, and one of them is keeping a Sabbath. He's a pastor on the West Coast, made some major changes in his life, and this book has been read by many Christians, highly recommended by others, but also by me, and so John Mark Comer, Ruthless, Elimination of Hurry. You can find it on Amazon. It's a good read to begin to think through maybe some more practical ways you're going to have a day of rest. Spoiler alert, one of the things he does on his Sabbath with his kids is they make some ridiculous sundae, like ice cream sundae, that's like gigantic and has all this stuff in it, and they all eat it together. And that's like their kids are like, it's the Sabbath, we're so excited. So you can think about it, right? You want this to be something that you look forward to. All right, lastly, commit the fourth commandment to your memory. We're trying to not be like the statistic that says most Christians cannot quote like even 5 of the 10 commandments. I want each of you to be able to quote all 10 commandments by the time we're done. By Mother's Day, I want you to be able to quote, or the week after, because I'm going to challenge you to memorize the rest of them on Mother's Day. By the time I go on my sabbatical, resting from this job for 6 weeks, I want to encourage you to have all the 10 commandments memorized. Psalm chapter 16, verse 11 says, "You make known to me the path of life." We see it in the 10 commandments. What is the path of life that God has for us? This is how we're supposed to live. This is how we walk in freedom. What are the 10 commandments? We'll start with the first 4, right? You shall have no other God before me. Second one is you shall not make for yourself a graven image. Third is you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. And the one today is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's just the first 4. Start with those. Trying to memorize all 10 at a time might be overwhelming. Start with those 4. Memorize them. When you come in next week, before the sermon, you'll see that transition video again, and you can quiz yourself, see if you got it right. But anyways, we're going to have a closing song, It Is Well With My Soul, and ask you to stand. I want you to think about the words. What we're saying when we sing this song is, I can rest because of the work Jesus did on my behalf on the cross.